Hello, welcome to weeks 9 and 10. I'll be covering in this lecture controversies 5 and 6. Should family members provide for their own? And should older people be protected from making bad choices? These topics are covered in pages 201 to 264. So first, should families provide for their own? Moody and Sasser in this chapter attempt to do a couple of things. First is that they want to dispel this notion that in the United States, when older adults require care, that we have this practice of just putting them in a nursing home and throwing away the lock and the key. And that is actually not true. Only 5% of older adults over the age of 65 are living in a nursing facility at any one point in time. But you can also get a little confused with these statistics because 40% of older adults over the age of 65 may require services that are offered in long-term care. So for example, maybe respite services or perhaps rehabilitation services. Most long-term care facilities today not only offer long-term care, but also short-term care, and short-term for recovery purposes from an injury or an illness. So long-term care services are utilized by older adults, but only 5% are living in them on a long-term basis. And in fact, 80 to 83% of the long-term care that is provided to older adults in the United States are provided by family members. About 1 in 3 caregivers are over the age of 65 themselves, and approximately 2/3 of caregivers are women. And there are about 25% of the caregivers that are taking care of people with dementia are what's called the sandwich generation, or part of the sandwich generation, which is addressed on page 203. The sandwich generation are people who get caught in the middle of taking care of older adults at the same time they are raising a family, having a full-time job, and they get caught in the middle of those responsibilities. And one of the reasons that the sandwich generation is becoming more prevalent in the United States is because women are waiting longer to have their children. So if they're waiting to have kids in their 30s, their parents could very well be in their 70s, maybe even in their 80s. And so if these women are waiting to have children later in their life, then they run the risk of having to get caught in this sandwich generation phenomenon. So caregiving is changing in the United States. And one of the things that Moody and Sasser also talk about is this idea of, should we be paying families to stay home and take care of their loved ones? And this argument is presented for basically 2 reasons. Number one, most people can't afford to not work and stay home and take care of an elderly person. So there's a financial impact to doing that. And secondly, we don't have enough caregivers in the United States that will ultimately be needed to provide care for older adults. So maybe it makes sense for us to be looking at whether or not we should be paying people to stay home and take care of grandma and grandpa or mom and dad. And when I say we should pay them, I'm talking about the government. So maybe that is a tax break, a tax incentive of some type, or actually a stipend that comes to the family for caring for older adults. So like most things, this is set up as a controversy, and there are arguments pro and con to this issue of paying family caregivers. So I want you to be sure to take a look at those readings in your chapter. Also, I want you to understand how long-term care is paid for. Many people believe that long-term care is paid for by Medicare. And Medicare, if you remember, is the federal program that provides insurance for older adults. Well, surprise, surprise, Medicare does not pay for long-term care services. In fact, Medicare is only covering about 21% of people who are receiving long-term care services right now, only 21% of them are being covered by Medicare, 40% of them are being covered by Medicaid, and about 15%, 15 to 18% are paying out of their pocket to be in long-term care. So this is a big issue considering the fact that long-term care can cost people up to $8,000 a month, is that it is very expensive care. So if people can't afford to move into nursing facilities, maybe we need to be helping them be able to stay at home and get care at home by paid family members. So I want you to understand that concept about how long-term care is financed, and that's on page 210. There is Exhibit 24 that I want you to be sure to be familiar with. Pages 211 to 217 go into a lot of detail about Medicaid and how to qualify for Medicaid and Medicaid estate planning and spending down. You do not need to know that information, so I'd like you to just make sure that you're reading number 24 and reading number 25. So then we are moving on to controversy number 6. Should older people be protected from bad choices? So this is a very interesting topic, and it's not a topic that is necessarily all cut and dry. But Moody and Sasser want to ask this question: why should old people be protected from risky choices if those choices are important for their quality of life? So just like all of us, we all make bad choices. Sometimes we make bad decisions. Why should an elderly person not be allowed to make bad choices and bad decisions for themselves? And Moody and Sasser say that we have no right to interfere with the liberty of somebody else, with their autonomy and with their ability to self-determine what they want to do, unless we have grounds to doubt their mental competence. So, and if an older person is making bad decisions and they don't understand what those decisions are, and more importantly, what the consequences of those decisions are, that is the time in which we should be intervening. So balancing quality of life, liberty, their sense of autonomy, understanding somebody's cognitive ability to make those choices becomes a very fine line for family members. So they open up the chapter by talking about Uncle Bert. And Uncle Bert is an older man living at home by himself, and the family hired a housekeeper to come in a few times a week just to help him out, make food, clean the house, things like that. Well, the housekeeper begins to introduce her boyfriend into the scenario, and the boyfriend befriends Bert, and the next thing you know, Bert is writing checks to the boyfriend to help him fund his business or a new business initiative. And the family also suspects that the relationship between Bert and the housekeeper is not simply one of employee and employer. So the family becomes concerned that Bert is just simply not making good decisions for himself, and he's being taken advantage of. But on the other side, you've got Bert, who is really happy. He has companionship by this housekeeper and by her boyfriend. Maybe he has enough money that he can afford to help this person out with their business. So what right does the family have to come in and interfere with what it is that Bert wants to do? So, like I said, no easy answers to a lot of these difficult questions, but I want to point your attention to the fact that in your folder is also another video lecture from me about ethics, healthcare and ethics as it relates to older adults. And that is a lecture that goes a little bit more into detail about ethical principles related to healthcare and older adult decision making. Principles such as autonomy, individuality, justice, self-determination, I think I said this already, individualization, confidentiality, privacy. These are ethical principles that we always must apply when we are talking about care for older adults. And so I want you to watch that video because you will have a case study that also is in week 9 that presents to you 2 cases. I want you to pick one case and break it down. And break it down based on the ethical principles that are included in my lecture. And I want you to analyze what's going on and identify the ethical principles at play and discuss what you think should be done in response to the situation. So make sure that you're taking a look at that. But back to Uncle Bert. So Uncle Bert is not making decisions that his family thinks are too good for him. What choices do they have? So we have a process in place that is called guardianship. And if the family becomes overly concerned about Bert and what he's doing, they can petition to become his guardian. That means they can go to court and have Uncle Bert declared incompetent. And in order for Uncle Bert to be declared incompetent, 2 physicians have to declare that he does not have the mental capacity or the cognitive capacity to be making decisions for himself. There are 2 kinds of guardianship. One can be guardianship of just the money. The other is guardianship over the person. If you're guardian over the person, you can make healthcare decisions on behalf of the person. If you're guardian over somebody's estate, then you're essentially given the responsibility of paying bills and looking after the estate. So we have to always kind of be paying attention to whether or not what's going on with this older person is considered abusive. Are they being neglected? Are they being exploited? Are they being financially abused? And so one of the things that we need to know as potentially people going into working with older adults in any type of setting is that we would be considered mandated reporters, which is if you suspect that there's abuse happening in this older person's life, you need to report that as an allegation of abuse. You can report that to your supervisor, you can report it directly to the Department of Aging, but anytime you suspect abuse, it's something that needs to be reported. And if it isn't, you could actually be named as an accomplice to elder abuse. So mandatory reporting is required, I believe, in 47 states or 42 states, where laws are in place that say you have to report if you suspect elder abuse. In your folder is also a diagram that outlines the abuse prevention procedures that we took in my facility. And I was the abuse prevention coordinator. And so it was my responsibility to be sure that new staff and current staff were properly trained on how to recognize the signs of abuse, how to report abuse, and how to prevent abuse. So we had very, very strict policies and procedures in place. And so I want you to take a look at that because I want you to be sure you understand the various forms of elder abuse. There's physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse. There's involuntary seclusion or isolation, verbal abuse, and one of the more recent types of abuse is social media abuse. That would be somebody whose picture is posted on social media against their will without their permission, and the picture is posted in a way to make fun of the person, to ridicule the person, and is posted without their permission. That is considered a privacy violation, a confidentiality violation, as well as a violation to the person's dignity. So with the advent of cell phones and employees walking around hospitals and nursing facilities and assisted living communities with their phone in their pocket, which has a camera, we have to be sure that we have policies, very strict policies in place that prevent a form of abuse from taking place. So one of the other myths that we need to dispel or that Moody and Sasser want to dispel is this issue about elder abuse, and the thought there that if you move into a nursing facility or assisted living, you are going to be abused, and that's where abuse takes place. The reality is that abuse of older adults occurs more frequently in their homes, in their own home, than in a nursing facility or assisted living community. So just think about that for a minute. Now, I'm not saying that abuse never occurs in nursing homes or assisted living communities. They certainly do, but it's more prevalent for older adults who are living isolated in their own homes. Financial exploitation, I'm sure you've heard about it in the news and wherever, that it's very prevalent for people living in their own homes to succumb and be vulnerable to financial ploys. They're lonely, the phone rings, they get a friendly person on the other end of the phone, and the next thing you know, they're giving out their credit card number over the phone, or their social security number. Or a neighbor befriends an older adult, and the next thing you know, checks are being written to the neighbor to run certain errands and things like that. So we just need to understand elder abuse is very prevalent, and there is a link in your Week 9 folder that is a link to the National Center on Elder Abuse. I want you to look through some of the information that's on that website and educate yourself about the issues and incidents of elder abuse. I did mention that you'll have a case study to do. That will be due on March 31st. We've talked about guardianship, and I believe that I have covered the topics that I wanted to in this lecture. So do older adults, should they be protected from bad choices? The answer to that is no, with the caveat, unless they don't understand the decisions that they're making and the consequences of those decisions. Otherwise, a diabetic living in her own home can choose to go off her diet. She can choose to maybe not take her insulin. A heart patient can choose to eat fried chicken. A person living alone in their own home can choose to give money to a neighbor who is doing nice things for them. People can make bad decisions for themselves. Older adults can. We don't have the right to swoop in and violate their privacy, to interfere. But when their well-being is at risk, when they are being abused, when they don't understand what's happening, those are the criteria that we need to always keep in mind when we're working with older adults in this way. So I think I've covered everything. You know where to find me. I hope you have a good couple of weeks. And this lecture covers, by the way, weeks 9 and 10. So take care, and I will see you soon.